Thanks so much for joining us here on RT today. I'm Rory Suchet, live in Moscow. It's now just after 11 a.m. Welcome to the program. Russia's all but ruled out any chance of extraditing America's most wanted man, who's holed up in transit at a Moscow airport. President Putin has declared Edward Snowden's never crossed into Russia territory, rendering him immune to and outside that of the government's reach. RT's Alexei Rashevsky has more.
Ever since Edward Snowden touched down in Moscow on Sunday, it's been the biggest mystery for the last 72 hours or so what his next move would be. He was supposed to fly to Havana from Moscow on Monday. He even checked in supposedly for that flight, but never made it there. Ever since it's been speculated that he may have left the country on a different flight. He may have left it elsewhere. Even some have been alleging that he may have been detained by the Russian authorities to later to be extradited to the United States. Both of these claims were in fact quashed by the Russian president, who compared Mr. Snowden to the case of another very famous whistleblower.
Snowden's case is similar to that of Julian Assange. Both call themselves defenders of human rights and fight for the freedom of information. You have to ask yourself, do such people need to be hunted down and put in prison? I personally would like to avoid cases like these. It's like shearing a pig, lots of shrieking, but little fur.
Well, the Russians were rather clear in their explanation as to why Snowden would not be extradited to the United States. The explanation coming from the Chinese authorities as to why they denied the extradition to the United States was deemed hilarious and amusing by many online. Now, believe it or not, the Hong Kong authorities said they would not extradite Snowden because in the paperwork that the United States provided to the Chinese of the former NSA man, they did not specify what the J in the Edward J. Snowden stood for, John or James, so that's why they denied the extradition. Of course, there's been lots of uproar about that coming from across the Atlantic, with some of the politicians in Washington pointing the fingers at Moscow and Beijing for not cooperating with Washington on the whistleblower on Edward Snowden. Some have even been alleging that Snowden has been working together with the Russian and the Chinese special services. This claim was yet again denounced by both the Russian foreign minister and the Russian president.
Any accusations against Russia are nothing but rubbish, simply ravings. Our special services never interacted with Snowden and are not doing so today.
Edward Snowden is not only the most wanted man across the Atlantic, he's also the most wanted man by the media. Now, this plane he was supposed to board on Monday carried more than half of Moscow's international press corps. Basically, they went on a 3-day holiday to the Caribbean, and now it's also speculated what his next move would be. Some are saying that he may wait for the dust to settle down and then move elsewhere. Some are saying that he may wait for his asylum plea to be satisfied by either Ecuador or Venezuela. In any case, we're here at Moscow's Sheremetyevo Airport waiting for the next move of the world's most high-profile whistleblower.
At Moscow's Sheremetyevo Airport, RT's Alexei Rashevsky. Now, Russia may face consequences for its inaction. This is a warning from senior U.S. officials, foremost among them the Secretary of State John Kerry. And more than that, though, it's not just Moscow that it may face Washington's anger. There's more issues to it. Gane Chichikan reports on this.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry hinted at possible consequences that Russia may face for its response on Snowden, saying at times Russians have criminals in the U.S. they're looking for, and he said the U.S. had cooperated on handing over 7 of them in the past 2 years. Although, if it were a Russian whistleblower who stood up for civil liberties in Russia, it's kind of hard to imagine the U.S. handing them over very quickly, especially if the U.S. were not legally obliged to do so. And in the case of Snowden, we heard the Russian president say Russia had no legal authority to stop him from traveling. Formally, he hasn't crossed the Russian border. He is a transit passenger, didn't need a Russian visa, and he hasn't committed any crimes in Russia. Moscow says Russia doesn't want to have anything to do with Mr. Snowden. But it's amazing how this story, which had absolutely nothing to do with Russia, is all about Russia now. Much of the media here has turned the whole Snowden story into a story about Putin. They invite lawmakers and experts who focus on Russia and Putin. Here's, for example, Senator McCain weighing in on the story.
look, we've got to start dealing with Vladimir Putin in a realistic fashion for what he is. He's an old KGB colonel apparatchik that dreams of the days of the Russian Empire, and he continues to stick his thumb in our eye in a broad variety of ways.
This kind of narrative in the media that's focused on Russia certainly helps build up negative public opinion on Snowden and eventually discredit his revelations. The focus is not just on Russia, but also on China. And you hear U.S. officials blast Hong Kong for letting Snowden fly. But what about one of his revelations, the fact that the U.S. spied on Chinese research centers and universities? Here's the explanation that we heard from Secretary Kerry.
It's not our surveillance activities on them. It's our surveillance activities anonymously
on thousands of Chinese citizens and the Chinese university.
Anonymously, in order to be able to track terrorism. And if there is an act of terrorism or some linkage that is appropriate, some indicator.
In China?
Whatever it is, it could be anywhere in the world. Whatever it is, then you have to go to court. And you have to have court approval in order to do anything that is actually name-specific, person-specific.
So Secretary Kerry said the U.S. was spying on Chinese research centers and universities to find terrorists. A lot of people would find that response quite confusing. China would probably not buy it. So you see U.S. officials being quite evasive on what they're actually doing, preferring to focus on the messenger instead, on Edward Snowden. And here's my colleague Anastasia Churkina on how the media here goes along with that narrative.
Some journalists believe the shocking U.S. government spying scandal is the biggest story of our lifetime.
I, sitting at my desk, certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president if I had a personal email.
But Big Brother shamelessly watching millions of people in secret seems to be turning into little more than a cat and mouse chase by the American mainstream media.
Snowden.
To my mind, the only thing that's really important about Edward Snowden is really how the government is cracking down on him and chasing him all over the place.
But that's far from most of the media's focus. Instead, Snowden as the source, not the substance of the NSA scandal, is all the rage.
Betraying your country is kind of a fashion statement. He wants to be the national security Kim Kardashian.
There's an old technique called change the subject. When you don't like what the subject is about, you change it and you personalize it, or you try to see what the problems are with the people who are delivering the message and avoid actually explaining the message itself. In this case, a massive spy scandal has been turned into a possible case of treason.
As in Alice in Wonderland, first comes the verdict, then the trial, with pundits eager to shoot the messenger.
We need to get very, very serious about treason. And oh, by the way, for treason, as in the case of Bradley Manning or Edward Snowden, you bring back the death penalty.
From questioning whether the reporter who broke the scandal with Snowden as his source should be punished along with the whistleblower.
Why shouldn't you, Mr. Greenwald, be charged with a crime?
To news reports focused on Snowden's girlfriend.
What's curious, she also packed everything up and left for the mainland.
To pointing fingers at any other government but their own.
Whether China or Russia has been able to sort of suck out that knowledge from those computers while he's been in their countries.
Avoiding the issue at hand seems to be a priority.
It doesn't surprise me that there should be this focus on Snowden's private issues or his private affairs or his whereabouts and travels, instead on the incredibly important revelations that he has given us.
The answer to the question why is simple.
Because they failed to do their job, to actually expose all this. So now they're blaming somebody who has exposed it, and it makes them look bad. Ditto for the government.
The media coverage of the NSA scandal, a litmus test for journalism that most are failing. Instead of cleaning up their act and dwindling ratings, networks are busy looking for bad guys elsewhere, instead of looking the real villain in the face.
When you consider the fact that as recently as the 1970s, Richard Nixon was forced to resign in large part because he bugged roughly 50 people's phone calls. This is a huge change in our perception.
While a media war breaks out over supporting or hating Edward Snowden, as little airtime as possible is actually dedicated to the spying on unsuspecting citizens itself. The biggest privacy leak in recent U.S. history has shown the media to have little ability to deal with complex issues, instead indulging themselves in a manhunt yet again. But then again, this shouldn't be too shocking. When the finger pointing every now and then is paused, it's stories like this that fill airtime.
You're the gorilla looking super bored. They're shouting, "You're ugly! You're ugly!" Wait.
Anastasia Churkina, RT, New York.
And Eric Draitser, a New York-based geopolitical analyst, he believes the government and media are both in cahoots, waging a concentrated smear campaign against that of Mr. Snowden.
In the United States, we see a concerted propaganda campaign designed to demonize and to destroy the image, if not the total character, of Snowden. And we see this happening from the right wing and also from the left wing. Those who are attacking Glenn Greenwald for his revelations and Snowden themselves. This is now becoming a real story in the United States. The way in which the controlled media is attacking Snowden and serving the interests of the surveillance state and the partisanship behind President Obama. The United States certainly will not give up. We've seen cases of extraordinary rendition from all over the globe carried out by the United States, and it wasn't just in the context of so-called terrorists. If I were Snowden, I would be working under the assumption that there really is no place anywhere on earth that will be 100% safe. But I think that the strategy that he has taken, incorporating China, incorporating Russia, using the infrastructure built up by WikiLeaks, is absolutely critical to ensuring his safety.
And while Washington maintains the large-scale surveillance project exposed by Snowden, saying that it only targets terrorism, it apparently turns out that Skyping, Googling and chasing likes on Facebook aren't something potential terrorists usually do. RT's Irina Galushko told me earlier here on RT what part of cyberspace they tend to occupy instead.
In their supposed quest for preventing terror attacks and increasing security, PRISM only gathers data from the internet big players, such as Google, Skype, Facebook, and so on. But most of those who look for jihadist or terrorist-related information can find it only on the appropriate forums, which are hidden deep within the so-called underweb. None of these resources in that realm are actually indexed by the major search engines. In fact, Google had at one point admitted that it indexes a tiny fraction of just 1% of all data that's available on the web. If you imagine it as an iceberg, then you can understand that PRISM only covers the very top, the very tip of the iceberg. The rest of the information is actually not covered by PRISM. According to Dutch intelligence service, potential terrorists go to these core forums, which are highly encrypted and hidden deep within the web. So one really needs to know what they're looking for and where to find it. A case in point could be the Tsarnaev brothers. They have turned to one of the more known radical sources, sometimes referred to as the Vanity Fair of Al-Qaeda. Though the website's existence is no secret, for some reason, U.S. security services failed to track down the brothers' activity even after a tip-off from Russia, and thereby they failed to prevent the Boston bombings. So, although the CIA and the NSA say their surveillance programs are directed at protecting people, it seems like they're too busy reading innocent people's emails to actually track down those who do pose danger.
And human rights activist Peter Tatchell, he believes the U.S. is trying to twist the Snowden case and what it classes as his shameful revelations to simply disguise the fact that it's been caught red-handed.
Well, of course, the United States government will try and spin it whatever way it can to discredit Edward Snowden and to put its own policies in the best possible light. But the fact is, instead of going for the messenger, public focus and government focus should be on the message he's given, which is that millions of people worldwide who are entirely innocent have been subjected to mass surveillance by the US administration without the approval of Congress. Congress never voted to put this system in place, nor have the governments of any other country. This is rogue spying by a rogue state. I mean, if Edward Snowden had been an Iranian whistleblower who had exposed global snooping by the Tehran regime, he would have been hailed by the United States as a heroic whistleblower. He would have been lauded and praised.
And today's edition of Crosstalk also focuses on Snowden's actions and what could await him in the future.